Gran Turismo is a very strange video game adaptation because it's actually a motorsports movie based on real events. So it should be compared not to the Need for Speed adaptation or something, but to films like Rush and Ford vs. Ferrari, especially since the last quarter of the movie, strictly speaking, is about the 24 hours of Le Mans. In a way, the idea of making a movie based on the biography of real racer Jan Martinborough is a stroke of genius. But that's not all. The movie is directed by Neil Blomkamp. Everybody knows him from District 9. And it stars David Harbour and Orlando Bloom. So there are enough reasons to get over your initial skepticism and go to the movies to see what's really hiding behind the name of Gran Turismo. In fact, it is a quite an enjoyable movie, but the closest analog, oddly enough, would probably be the French comic book adaptation of Michel Vaillant that came out 20 years ago, co-written and co-produced by Luc Besson. Michel Vaillant is more fictitious and ignores the reality of racing at Le Mans whenever it feels like it. Gran Turismo, since it is based on actual events, is more serious in its approach, but it simplifies things more than it should. You might argue that everyone is doing that, but it is a question of the magnitude of this dumbing down of motorsport for the big screen. Ford vs. Ferrari is an exceptional movie, but it takes some serious liberties with the source material. For example, implying that Ford was competitive right away and basically won Le Mans in its first year of participation, which is simply not true. But it doesn't distort reality in an unreasonable manner. Rush also takes some liberties, but stays more or less accurate for the most part. Also, it is dedicated to an iconic rivalry of Lauda and Hunt. It is brilliantly written and shot. This is simply the best film about motorsport ever. But yes, some liberties were taken. Now, once again, take a step back and observe what we're doing here. We're comparing films like Rush and Ford vs. Ferrari to Gran Turismo, a movie based on a video game by Sony. This is weird. Who could have thought about it even a couple of months ago? But it is the only logical approach, and it says a lot about what we're dealing with. Gran Turismo squeezed itself into this narrow niche of racing dramas. We're not comparing it with Fast and Furious or even Days of Thunder. This is a very interesting accomplishment in itself. And even if Rush is miles ahead of Gran Turismo, we still have a quite enjoyable and quite competent movie at our disposal, especially if you can ignore all the oversimplifications and sometimes outright lies that the film tells you. Actually, Gran Turismo starts with one big lie, which I guess people don't usually notice. They immediately tell you that Kazunori Yamauchi, producer, game designer, and CEO of Polyphony Digital, I quote, he created the world's most accurate racing simulator. Yeah, I understand that Sony has to tell you something like that for obvious reasons, but it sounds a bit, let's put it this way, you probably can take Sony to court for this kind of statement. Gran Turismo series evolved significantly over the years, but the first couple of installments were simply overhyped racing games without any serious simulation going on. And I'm old enough to remember Yamauchi's interviews on the subject. Well, at least one interview where he discussed this simulation process. I'm not sure it is available online. It's been more than 20 years ago and probably in the print press, so I will tell you my recollections. And yeah, one of the reasons I paid attention to this is because I used to be a video game journalist back then, eventually becoming an editor in chief, but I digress. So, the first couple of Gran Turismo games never used any serious telemetry or something. The way the car performs on the track was based on Mr. Yamauchi's personal experience. He was literally saying in the interviews that he tested a number of cars that were later included in the game, and he was driving them around the track taking notes. And then they tweaked the game balance according to the impressions that the game designer had during these tests. This is ridiculous. I mean, yeah, Gran Turismo are good games with a good budget, but claiming that it accurately simulated something is simply untrue. There were much more advanced games at the time of the initial release of Gran Turismo, including Grand Prix 2. And later, Grand Prix had a couple of other sequels which actually used telemetry from Formula One cars. Modern Gran Turismo games are obviously much more advanced, but it is still wildly inferior to something like R Factor 2. Also, when you're making claims about the world's most accurate racing simulator, you should take into consideration that there are proprietary simulators used by racing teams, including Formula One teams, obviously. And this is just a start, the first minute of the movie. Then they take this story of Jan Mardenborough, a significantly simplified version of it. So Mardenborough actually participated in Gran Turismo video game championships, and Sony's marketing and Nissan's marketing wanted to show how the skills of a simulation driver can be translated into a real-life racing experience, even if it is not a proper simulator, but Gran Turismo, which was fairly decent back then. So all of this, in fact, is happening more than 10 years ago, in the year 2011 to be precise. Jan Mardenborough won the so-called GT Academy and was awarded a seat at various GT racing series. Basically, he had a full season in the British GT Championship, where he proved to be a competent driver. He finished 6th in the final standings, together with his teammate. He also then made a switch to single-seaters, but without much success. Although he had a full season in European Formula 3, a full season in GP3, and a couple of races in GP2. Eventually going to Japan to compete in the local Formula 3 and then Super Formula. He wasn't an embarrassment in the single-seaters. He actually managed to finish second in Japanese Formula 3 at some point. Obviously, he wasn't a Formula 1 material by any stretch of imagination, but he was decisively better than some talentless junior category drivers with strong backing like Sean Gillisle, Roy Nissany, or Tatiana Calderon. But his focus was GT cars, and that is where he is racing right now, in the Japanese GT championships. So overall, this story and this grand idea that you can take a guy who's exceptionally good at driving cars in video games, and then, after some training, he's gonna be a competent real-life race car driver, well, yeah, Jan Mardenborough proved that it is possible. He wasn't the only one, but yeah. And this idea that a simulation driver can be competitive is not without its logic, especially since, as I've mentioned, racing teams have their own simulators, and these simulators are a very important part of both car development and driver training. So there is a good story there, and filmmakers are doing a good job of transporting it to the screen, using some proven cliches involving a wise mentor played by David Harbour of Stranger Things fame, who, as you can imagine, absolutely steals the show. Oh, and there's also Jerry Halliwell in the movie, who is the real-life wife of Christian Horner, the team principal of the Red Bull Formula One team, and also a former member of Spice Girls. Okay, but then again, we have this problem of twisting the reality a bit too much. First of all, the preparation of a simulation driver transitioning into real sports is a much more serious thing than they show you. They completely omit any qualifications and free practice drives, which gives you an impression that the driver just gets into the car 5 minutes before the event and starts from a random position on the grid. They use this idea that you need to secure a 4th place finish in one of the 6 races during the season of the unnamed championship to obtain some unnamed FIA license. which is not exactly how it works. And once again, he had 10 races in British GT in 2012, a full season, and he had a teammate, so they were swapping seats back and forth. Only after a full season and some other races in 2013, which included single seaters, he was allowed to participate at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, where he did a stellar job, and it was a wise decision to make a culmination of the movie out of this particular event. But, once again, they omit and edit out a number of very important things. For example, no, his team wasn't composed of Gran Turismo video game drivers. It was mixed. Two Gran Turismo drivers and one driver. But then again, at this point, Jan Mardenborough was a proven competent GT driver himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be admitted to the race. He was affiliated with the Nissan and he was driving for a Nissan powered team at this event. But what they don't tell you is that it wasn't really a factory team, and it was actually in the LMP2 category. So, yes, the fact that Mardenborough managed to finish on the podium at Le Mans is an exceptional achievement. But it wasn't, the overall podium of Le Mans, as the movie implies. It was the podium for the LMP2 category only. Overall, he finished ninth. 2 years later, Nissan actually tried to field an LMP1 car for the top category of the World Endurance Championship. And yes, Mardenborough was a part of the team. But they failed to mention that this plan failed miserably. The LMP1 car produced by Nissan was so uncompetitive that they had to abandon the season after only one race. The whole depiction of Le Mans race is quite weird and very misleading, meaning it gives you a wrong impression about what this race is about. Well, probably not as misleading as what we see in the Michel Vaillant movie, but sometimes quite close. They even have their own version of Team Evil that Nissan has to overcome somehow. That said, Michel Vaillant movie was quite entertaining, even with all its cheesiness. Gran Turismo is entertaining as well, especially if you can somehow forget for a minute that it is based on actual events. So, what have we learned from Gran Turismo? Gran Turismo is a serious professional racing simulator. You don't need testing, you can jump in any car and drive. Overtaking comparable cars around the outside always works. In fact, the optimal racing line is on the outside. Nissan is great at Le Mans. In the end, it is a flawed but enjoyable movie. If you're a fan of motorsports, you'll have quite a lot of cringe-worthy moments. But the movie is not bad at all. It is very well produced and directed. And once again, the fact that we discuss Gran Turismo with films like Rush and Ford vs. Ferrari, and we're not being ironic, is worthy of some admiration.